Hi, today I want to walk you through creating a vendor analysis report using Excel refreshable reports from Microsoft Dynamics GP. I'm going to be using version GP 2010 Release 2 and Excel 2010. Now, let's get started. So I'm in the purchasing series in GP and I have my Excel refreshable reports deployed and I'm on the Excel reports tab on my navigation pane. And I want all possible columns available, so I'm going to use the generic default called Payables Transactions. And I'm just going to double click on this and it'll launch Excel and populate with the most recent data all of the columns, and there are a lot of them. So let's begin. We're going to do one column at a time. And what this report is going to do is it's going to show me the vendor in one column. Then in month by month, it'll show me the total amount that has been billed and paid and the total amount that has been billed and unpaid, so I can do comparison side by side. So the first thing let's do is let's create a column to distinguish whether or not an amount has been paid or not. So I'm going to insert a column and we'll call it paid with a question mark. And to create this column, we're going to insert the logical formula, an if statement. So if the current transaction amount is equal to 0, that means it's been paid, we'll list it as paid, otherwise it is unpaid. And we'll click OK. And notice it populates all the way down since this is a table. And you can see these transactions right here that have a 0 amount are indeed listed as paid, where everything else that has a transaction amount is listed as unpaid. Great. So let's insert another column. And in this next column, what we're going to do is enter in a month so we can evaluate the transaction date based on month. And to do this, we'll use, again, formulas, the date and time kinds of functions, and we'll choose month, and we'll insert the document date here. And now we have a column that indicates which month it is. Let's insert another one, and this time let's create one for year so we can evaluate what year the transaction is. And this will enable us to do time analysis. Oops. Chose the wrong calculation. We want the one called year. And now I can see the year for each transaction, and you can see that January 2014 is indeed correct and November 2013 also correct. Great. Now I'm going to create 4 more columns, and normally I would include these 4 columns in one column with a more complex nested formula, but I want to make it easy for you to understand exactly what I'm doing. So let's start with the first column. So I'm going to create a column, and this column is going to distinguish whether or not the transaction has been voided. So we'll call this column name voided. And what we're going to do is insert a logical formula if, and let's find the void status field, and we'll scroll all the way to the end. These are pretty much in alphabetical order, and the more commonly used ones are at the beginning. So void status, if that is equal to no, I need to put quotation marks around that. If that is equal to no, then that means it's not voided, and we're going to want to include the current transaction amount, which is the amount, which we're going to want the document amount, which is the total amount of the invoice. And again, we'll need to find that, the document amount. And if it is true, it means it is voided, then we want 0. So now we have this new column here that decides whether or not it's been voided. And if it has been voided, it puts a 0, and if it has not been voided, it puts the document amount. Now let's create another column, and in this column we're going to exclude payments. So we'll just call it exclude payments. And what we're going to do here is we're going to just look at this list and find any payments and exclude those from our list. So I'm going to highlight it, and you notice there's blank spaces at the end, so I need to make sure in my formula I include those blank spaces. So I copied that from my address bar there. So I'll insert a logical formula here if the document type is equal to payments, then, and if that's true, then I want a 0. And if it's not true, I'm going to include the amount in my voided column. Now normally, again, these would be nested, so I wouldn't do separate columns, but I want you to understand what I'm doing here. So in this particular line number 27, it's a payment. You can see the amount is 0, even though the original amount's $1,132.53. Now let's include another column, and in this column we are going to make credit memos a negative amount. So we're going to deal with credit memos. So we're going to say put in just an amount CM for credit memos are negative. And what we're going to do, let's find a credit memo source so we can copy that like we did a while ago. So we get those blank spaces at the end. So I'll copy that and put all my transactions back, and I'll do another logical statement. If the document type is equal to credit memo, then I'm going to want to take and make my new dollar value negative, and if it's not, I'll put the new dollar value for positive. So you can see the number will populate. Now let's go back and take a look at our credit memos. You can see they're all negative numbers in this column. But yet, invoices are positives. Okay, that's great. So now we're going to do one more, and we're going to call this one amount. But we're going to do the same thing we just did for credit memos, but we're going to deal with returns. So let's go through and select our return and copy it so we get all those blank spaces at the end. And here we're going to do another logical. If the document type is equal to return, then make a negative, the cash management -1, otherwise make it positive. So now we've accounted for excluding voided amounts, excluding payments, reversing the sign if it's a credit memo, and reversing the sign if it's a return. And that makes it everything we want. And we're going to be using this amount field in our analysis. So now let's go back to our worksheet, or click on a new tab to create a new worksheet. And the cool thing about Excel Refreshable Reports is all that work we just did is now saved, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Now what we're going to do is insert a pivot table. And it asks us what range of data we want. And I'm going to go back to the original worksheet and select all data. And again, I like to select all data because that way, while I'm working in pivot tables, if I want to change my report to look at something, anything, I can. So I can include any particular field that's in the system. So I'm going to scroll through. And an undocumented feature of Excel 2010 is when you are scrolling through all your columns like this, in older versions when you got to the end it would speed up. But in Excel 2010, when it gets to the end, it pauses so that you can actually stop your scrolling and take control of the situation without having to press F8 and move up or down. So, okay, great. So now we're in our pivot table work area. And the first thing we're going to do is populate the vendor name. So let me find the vendor name. And we're going to put it in our row format. So we have all the vendor names there. And now what we're going to do, we're going to use this new column we created called paid, and we're going to stick it in the column. So now we can see for each of our vendors we have paid and unpaid. And we're going to take this amount column we created that excludes voids, excludes payments, reverses the sign if it's a credit memo, and reverses the sign if it's a return, and we're going to drop it in values. And you can see it adds them up and it just counts them. So we need to make a change there, so we're going to click on the drop down list for the value and choose value field setting. And we'll change it to a sum, and we're going to change it to a currency format. And again, I like doing that because if it's a large number, you'll end up with a scientific calculation, and you don't want that to happen. So now for each vendor, for all transactions, we can see amount paid and unpaid. So let's take our year now and put it in the report filter so we can narrow it down for a particular year. Great. And then let's take our month and put it down into the column area. And now you can see we have paid and then each month and unpaid in each month. Let's, over in our pivot table field list, click on month and then click move up. So now for each period, 1, we have paid and unpaid and a total. period 2, paid and unpaid in a total, and so forth. So we can monitor all of this transaction. Now, from here, you may want to include a pivot chart, and you could do that very easily by selecting the kind of chart you want. And actually, you know what? Let's right mouse click and change our chart type. Let's do one like this, a 3D one. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And I always try to resize it when I try to move it. So we'll put that down there so we can look at it. Now, that's nice and neat and cool. I'm going to delete the chart for just a second. And I want to show you one more thing that you could do that's kind of cool. You can make it a detailed one by taking the document number and dragging it below vendor name. And now you can see all of the documents that make up that particular piece of data, which is kind of cool, and collapse it. So you could do some really interesting analysis here. This is a powerful way to work using pivot tables, Excel 2010, and Excel refreshable reports. So I hope this helps you evaluate your vendor analysis data better. Thanks.